More than 7 out of every 10 adults over 60 in this country are walking around right now with blood pressure numbers that qualify as high.
Feel completely fine. That is not a guess, and it is not a scare tactic. That is where the national health data sits today, and I want you to sit with that number for a second because it means high blood pressure is not something that happens to other people, to unlucky people, to people who eat badly. Statistically, it is happening to the majority of people your age right now, while they feel normal, while they sleep well, while they golf and garden and pick up their grandkids and never once feel the pressure climbing inside their own arteries. That is exactly why it earned its nickname decades ago. Doctors call it the silent killer, and I have watched that silence up close more times than I can count in my career. A patient who walks in feeling perfectly well, sits down for routine check, and leaves with a number on a printout that changes the rest of their year, sometimes the rest of their life. No chest pain announced it. No warning arrived in the mail. It was simply there, quietly, the whole time. Here is what I want you to know before we go any further. This video is not about salt. You have heard the salt lecture. Everyone has heard the salt lecture. What almost nobody has sat you down and explained is that there is a second half to this story. A list of ordinary foods sitting in ordinary grocery stores backed by real clinical trials that push blood pressure down through completely different doors than the ones your doctor usually has time to open in a 15-minute visit. 6 of them. Stay with me all the way to the last one because it is something so plain, so cheap, so unglamorous that when I first sat down and read the actual clinical trial behind it, I checked the numbers twice. It is not a supplement. It is not rare. It is sitting in the tea aisle of an ordinary grocery store, and in a peer-reviewed clinical trial, it produced a drop in blood pressure that one of the cardiologists reviewing the study said was, in his words, about the same size as what you would expect from a standard prescription blood pressure medication. I am not saying throw away your pills. I will come back to that, and I mean it seriously. But I am saying the research on that final food is one of the more remarkable things I have read all year, and you deserve to know it exists. My name is Dr. Park. I've spent more than 15 years in internal medicine and nutritional biochemistry, which is really just the science of how the food on your fork rewrites what's happening inside your body, often years after you've completely forgotten you ate it. I am not here to sell you a supplement, and I am not here to frighten you into some 12-week program. I am here to walk you through the actual published research plainly and tell you what it does and does not say, so that you can make your own decisions with your own doctor. Let me give you the 60-second version of what is actually happening inside you when your blood pressure climbs, because everything else in this video will make more sense once you can picture it. Your heart pushes roughly 2,000 gallons of blood through your body every single day. That blood does not float through your arteries. It is forced through them, under pressure, the way water is forced through a garden hose. When your arteries are supple and wide, that pressure stays low and the walls barely notice the traffic. But arteries stiffen with age. Cholesterol deposits build along the inner wall. And nearly all of us, whether we intend to or not, eat far more sodium than our kidneys were designed to process, which pulls extra fluid into the bloodstream and adds volume to a system that was already tight. Stiffer pipe, more fluid, same heart pumping, just as hard as it always did, and pressure rises. Here's the cruel part. The inside of an artery has no pain receptors.
You cannot feel it thickening. You cannot feel it stiffening.
You cannot feel the pressure creeping upward year after year, appointment after appointment, until it shows up somewhere you can feel it. Your heart, your kidneys, your brain. That is why it is silent. And that is why the food choices you make on an ordinary Tuesday matter so much more than most people realize. I need you to really hear this part, because it's the thing that convinced me this topic deserved its own video instead of a paragraph in someone else's. Even a small, sustained drop in blood pressure changes your odds in a way that has nothing to do with how you feel day to day. A reduction of just a few points off your top number, held over time, has been associated in national research with meaningfully lower risk of dying from a stroke, a heart attack, or any cause at all. You will not feel that difference on a Tuesday morning. You will not notice it in the mirror, but your arteries will carry a different amount of daily wear for the rest of your life, and that is the entire game we're playing here. Now, almost everything you've ever been told about blood pressure and diet is framed as subtraction. Less salt. Less salt, less salt. And I want to be clear, that advice is not wrong. Sodium is real, it is measurable, and for a meaningful share of people, it raises pressure directly. But subtraction is only half of the equation, and it is the half nearly every video, every pamphlet, and every rushed appointment stops at. Here is the half that gets left out. Your blood pressure is not simply a faucet you are trying to turn down. It is a balance, a genuine tug of war between two minerals in your bloodstream, sodium pulling water in, and potassium helping your kidneys push it back out. And it is also a question of how relaxed or how stiff your blood vessel walls happen to be at any given moment. And that second half of the equation can be changed by what you add, not only by what you remove. I want you to hold onto 2 ideas for the rest of this video, because every single food I'm about to show you works through one of these 2 doors, and sometimes both at once. Door 1 is the sodium-potassium balance I just mentioned. Give your kidneys enough potassium, and they become far more efficient at flushing excess sodium out through your urine, which takes pressure off the whole system. Door 2 is a molecule called nitric oxide, which your blood vessel walls use to physically loosen and widen, the same way a clenched fist relaxes into an open hand. Sodium-potassium balance and nitric oxide relaxation. Keep those two phrases in mind. You will see at least one of them, and often both, in every food on this list. I'll be honest with you about where my own instincts come from here, because it matters for how I read the research. I trained in Korea, and in traditional Korean medicine there is an old phrase, yaksik dongwon. Food and medicine share the same root. It is not mysticism. It is just an old culture's plain way of saying something modern nutritional biochemistry has since confirmed, one careful study at a time. Most of what protects your body starts at the dinner table, not the pharmacy counter. That idea genuinely shapes how I think about food, but I also want to be honest with you, because that honesty is the entire point of this channel. That same food culture that gave us yaksik dongwon also gave us kimchi and doenjang, dishes I grew up eating and still love. And some of those traditional fermented foods can carry as much sodium in a single serving as a fast food meal. Traditional does not mean safe. Korean does not mean healthy. What matters is the biochemistry sitting on the actual plate in front of you, not the flag stitched onto the recipe. So today, we are not leaning on tradition for its own sake. We are leaning on the published clinical research, wherever in the world it happened to come from. Your arteries aren't waiting for a prescription. They're waiting for dinner. Keep that in mind because we're about to start the countdown, and I think a few of these are going to surprise you. Number 6 is beetroot, and specifically beetroot juice, which has become one of the most heavily studied foods in cardiovascular research over the past 15 years, for a reason that has nothing to do with folklore. Beets are unusually rich in a compound called inorganic nitrate.
When you eat or drink it, bacteria living on the back of your tongue convert that nitrate into nitrite, and your body then converts that nitrite into nitric oxide, the same vessel-relaxing molecule I just asked you to remember. In a randomized, placebo-controlled trial published in the journal Hypertension, researchers gave 68 adults with high blood pressure nitrate-rich beetroot juice every day for 4 weeks.
Their systolic blood pressure, the top number, dropped by an average of 9 points. The group given a nitrate-stripped placebo juice barely moved, less than a single point. 9 points from something you can buy in the produce aisle. Here is why this deserves the "why is this even here?" reaction. Most people think of beets as a slightly old-fashioned vegetable, something from a grandmother's pickle jar, not a vascular intervention with a measurable dose-response curve. Sports scientists actually found this pathway before cardiologists did. Endurance athletes started drinking beet juice years ago because nitrate appears to make the muscles use oxygen more efficiently. And it was only afterward that researchers turned the same question toward blood pressure and found the second, arguably more important effect sitting right alongside it. But the mechanism is direct, and it is well replicated across multiple research groups, not just one lab. So what should you actually do with this? You do not need to juice a mountain of beets every morning. A small glass of beet juice, roughly half a cup to a cup, or a serving of roasted or steamed beets a few times a week, appears to be enough to nudge that nitrate pathway. One practical note. Beet juice can turn your urine a harmless shade of pink or red, which occasionally alarms people the first time it happens. It is not blood, it is simply the pigment passing through. If you take blood pressure medication already, keep taking it. I say this is a complement, not a replacement, and I will come back to that point later because it matters for every item on this list. Number 5 is garlic. Not the raw clove you crush into a stir fry at the last second, but specifically aged garlic extract, a form where raw garlic is aged for months, which mellows the smell and concentrates a compound called S-allyl-cysteine. This is worth pausing on because it is the kind of detail that changes an entire result. A researcher named Karen Reed has run a series of clinical trials on this exact question, and in 2020, she published a meta-analysis pooling 12 trials and more than 550 adults with high blood pressure. Across all of them, aged garlic extract lowered systolic blood pressure by an average of 8.3 points, and the bottom number by 5.5 points. That effect size, in some of her later papers, is described as comparable to what you'd expect from a single standard blood pressure medication. Not a cure, but a genuinely meaningful reduction, and one of the more consistent findings in this entire body of research. The likely mechanism runs through both of our doors at once. Garlic compounds appear to support nitric oxide production in vessel walls, and some research also points to mild effects on arterial stiffness. Here's the practical note, because this is where people get tripped up. Raw garlic added to your cooking is a wonderful habit for 100 different reasons, but the specific blood pressure data comes overwhelmingly from aged garlic extract at doses most people are not getting from a clove or two at dinner. If you want to explore this seriously, that's a conversation to have with your physician, especially because garlic has a mild blood thinning effect of its own, which brings up something important if you are already on a blood thinner like warfarin. And I want you to actually remember that when we get to the caveats later, not just hear it once and let it slide past. It's worth saying plainly, too. Garlic has been treated as a folk remedy in cultures around the world for thousands of years, in Korea and everywhere else. And for most of that history, nobody could have told you which specific compound was doing the work or at what dose. That's precisely the gap modern research exists to close. Not to dismiss the old habit, but to figure out exactly how much of it actually matters, and in what form. Number 4 is kiwi fruit, and I will admit this is one of my favorite studies to talk about because of how the researchers designed it. A team at Oslo University Hospital in Norway took 118 adults with moderately elevated blood pressure and split them into 2 groups. One group ate 3 kiwi fruits a day. The other group ate 1 apple a day, the classic apple a day comparison, almost as a wink to the old saying. After 8 weeks, the kiwi fruit group's systolic blood pressure had dropped an additional 3.6 points compared to the apple group, and their diastolic pressure was lower too. Now, 3.6 points does not sound dramatic on its own. But remember, this was kiwi beating apple, not kiwi beating nothing, meaning the true effect against a typical diet is likely even larger. The researchers believe the effect runs through kiwi's unusually high concentration of lutein, an antioxidant that appears to support nitric oxide activity in the lining of blood vessels. So, door number 2 again. Here's the why is this here moment. Kiwi rarely gets mentioned in blood pressure conversations at all. It gets filed under vitamin C and forgotten, the way a lot of ordinary fruit gets overshadowed by whatever superfood happens to be trending that year. But this was a real, randomized, controlled trial, run out of a hospital's own preventive cardiology department, not a nutrition database extrapolation dressed up to look like science. What I find most convincing about it is the design itself. The researchers weren't trying to prove kiwi was magic. They were testing it directly against another fruit that already has a reputation for being healthy, and kiwi still came out ahead. So, what should you do? 2 to 3 kiwi fruits a day was the actual studied amount. A genuinely easy habit, eaten with breakfast or as an afternoon snack, skin peeled, are not your choice.
Now, before we go further, I want to tell you that numbers 3, 2, and 1 are the ones that actually surprised me the most while researching this, especially the very last one. So if this kind of research is useful to you, this is a good moment to subscribe, because this channel exists specifically to keep pulling threads like this one out of the published literature, sourced and straight, no supplements to sell you.
Number 3 is the potato, and I promise you, I know exactly how that sounds. For years, the potato has been treated almost like a dietary villain, lumped in with white bread and sugar because of its carbohydrate content, and I understand why. But here is what almost never gets mentioned in that conversation. Ounce for ounce, a potato is one of the most potassium-dense foods most people eat regularly. A medium potato with the skin on can carry more potassium than a banana. And remember door number 1. Potassium helps your kidneys flush out sodium, taking real pressure off your entire circulatory system. Researchers at Purdue University ran a controlled feeding study specifically to test this, giving pre-hypertensive and hypertensive adults baked or boiled potatoes as their potassium source for 17 days. Compared to a control diet with the same calories but less potassium, the potato group's systolic blood pressure dropped by an average of 6 points. 6 points from a food most people have been quietly avoiding at dinner because they assumed it was working against them. This is exactly why this one belongs on the list. Not because potatoes are magic, but because the specific way most of us prepare and think about them has nothing to do with the way they were actually tested. So what should you do? Bake it, boil it, or steam it, skin on, and go easy on the salt and butter you pile on top, because that's genuinely where the danger in a potato lives. Not in the potato itself, but in what we've learned to smother it with. French fries and heavily salted mashed potatoes do not carry the same benefit. The potassium is often diminished by processing and completely overwhelmed by the sodium added on top. This is a good example of something I want you to notice as we go. It's rarely the food itself that's the problem. It's what an entire food culture has trained us to do to it. I see this exact pattern outside the potato constantly in my own practice. A genuinely useful food gets quietly convicted by association, guilty simply for sharing a plate with something that actually deserved the blame. Number 2 is dark chocolate. And yes, I am fully aware of how that sentence sounds coming from a physician on a video about protecting your arteries. But the research here is genuinely real. Even if it comes with an important asterisk I want to give you honestly, rather than let this turn into an excuse to eat a chocolate bar every night. Cocoa is one of the richest dietary sources of a class of compounds called flavonols. And in 2017, the Cochrane collaboration, widely considered the gold standard for unbiased, rigorous evidence review in medicine, published an updated analysis pooling 40 separate treatment comparisons across more than 1,800 people. The finding, flavanol-rich cocoa and dark chocolate lowered systolic blood pressure by an average of about 2 points compared to low flavanol controls. That is a modest number, and I want to say that plainly, rather than round it up into something flashier. This is not going to replace anything your doctor has prescribed. But here is the detail that makes it worth including. The effect was notably larger, specifically in people who already had elevated or high blood pressure to begin with, which is exactly the audience watching this video. The mechanism runs straight through door 2. cocoa flavanols support the same nitric oxide pathway we've talked about twice already, helping vessel walls physically relax. Here's the catch that keeps this from being a free pass. The benefit depends entirely on flavanol content, and most chocolate on a grocery store shelf has been processed in ways that strip most of those flavanols out, then loaded back up with sugar and milk fat, which cancels out any advantage you might have gained. European food safety regulators have specifically noted that you need roughly 200 milligrams of cocoa flavanols a day to see this vascular effect, which translates to somewhere around 10 grams, about one small square, of genuinely high flavanol dark chocolate, 70% cocoa content or higher. A milk chocolate bar wrapped in a health claim on the label is biochemically still mostly sugar and dairy fat. The flavanol content in most of those products has usually been processed down to almost nothing along the way. So what should you do? A single small square of 70 to 85% dark chocolate most days of the week, in place of a sugarier dessert, not stacked on top of one. Check the percentage on the label before you check the price, because in this particular case, the percentage is the only number that actually tells you whether you're buying the studied effect or just buying dessert. And now, the one I promised you at the very start. Number 1 is hibiscus tea. And I want to walk you through this study slowly, because when I first read the actual data, I genuinely went back and rechecked the numbers. Researchers at Tufts University, working out of the USDA's Human Nutrition Research Center on Aging, ran a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in 65 adults between the ages of 30 and 70 who had pre-hypertension or mildly elevated blood pressure, none of them on blood pressure medication. Half the group drank 3 cups of brewed hibiscus tea daily for 6 weeks. The other half drank a matched placebo beverage. After 6 weeks, the hibiscus tea group's systolic blood pressure had dropped by an average of about 7 points, compared to roughly 1 point in the placebo group. But here is the number that really stopped me. Among the participants whose blood pressure was higher to begin with, the drop averaged 13.2 points. 13 points from 3 cups of tea a day in a peer-reviewed, published clinical trial. One of the cardiologists who reviewed these findings publicly noted that a blood pressure reduction of that size is, in his words, equal to what you'd typically see from a single standard antihypertensive drug. I want to be careful here because that is one expert's characterization of a single trial, not a settled scientific consensus, and larger confirmatory studies have been called for ever since. A more recent pooled analysis across 7 smaller trials found a more modest average effect in the range of 4 to 5 points, which is still real and still worth having, just not quite as dramatic as that headline number. Both things are true at once. The single largest, most carefully controlled trial on this specific tea produced a genuinely striking result, and the wider body of evidence taken together is a bit more measured. Either way, this earns the top spot because of what it represents. An almost absurdly ordinary, inexpensive, widely available plant sitting quietly in the tea aisle, doing something in a controlled clinical trial that most people would assume only a prescription pad could do. I want to be honest that hibiscus tea itself is not new. It's been consumed for generations across parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Central America, long before a single clinical trial ever measured it. What changed is that Western medicine finally sat down and tested a plant that other cultures had already been drinking daily for a completely different reason and found a cardiovascular effect hiding inside it the whole time. The mechanism appears to run through both of our doors. Hibiscus is rich in anthocyanins, the same antioxidant family that gives it its deep red color, which seem to support nitric oxide activity while also having a mild, natural diuretic effect that helps the kidneys manage sodium and fluid. So what should you do? 3 cups of brewed hibiscus tea a day, hot or cold, was the actual studied amount. And one caveat I want you to genuinely hold on to, not just hear and forget. Hibiscus can interact with certain blood pressure and diabetes medications, and there is early research suggesting it may affect how your body processes acetaminophen. So if you are taking prescription medication for blood pressure already, this is a conversation to have with your doctor before you make it a daily habit, not after. Your arteries aren't waiting for a prescription, they're waiting for dinner. That's the whole idea behind this list, and now that you've heard all 6, let me show you how I'd actually put a few of them together, because a list is only useful if it turns into something you'll actually do on a Tuesday evening. Here's what I call the everyday bowl, and it takes about the same effort as anything else you'd make for dinner. Start with a baked or boiled potato. Skin on. That's your potassium base. Door number 1, working quietly through your kidneys all evening. Add a handful of roasted beets alongside it, or swap the potato for a mixed potato and beet roast if you want to combine them in one pan. That brings in your nitrate source. Door number 2, feeding the nitric oxide pathway that helps your vessels physically relax. Finish the plate with a couple of cloves of real garlic worked into the cooking, not for the aged extract level dose from the research, but as a habit that compounds over years alongside whatever lean protein and vegetables you'd normally choose. Then, instead of your usual after-dinner coffee or a sugary dessert, pour yourself a cup of hibiscus tea, and if you're in the mood, let yourself have 1 small square of dark, high cocoa chocolate with it. That's 5 of the 6 foods on this list, sitting on one ordinary plate at one ordinary meal, without a single supplement bottle in sight.
It's not a diet. It's not a program.
It's just what's already on the table, rearranged slightly on purpose. You don't need to do this every night to see something from it. And I don't want you to treat this like an all-or-nothing project, because that's exactly the kind of pressure that makes people quit good habits after 11 days. 2 or 3 times a week is a completely reasonable place to start. Let the rest of your week look however it already looks. The research behind these 6 foods was conducted over weeks, sometimes just a single month, which tells you something encouraging. This is not a decades-long project with results you'll never live to see. It's closer to a season of dinners. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Grace, because her story is the reason I keep making these videos instead of just publishing papers that nobody outside a hospital ever reads. Grace was 66, recently retired, managing blood pressure that sat stubbornly in the high normal range. Not bad enough for her doctor to add a second medication, but persistent enough that it worried her every time the cuff on her arm read out loud at the pharmacy. She had already cut her salt the way everyone tells you to, and she felt like she'd hit a wall, doing everything right and still watching that top number sit exactly where it had sat for 2 years. What changed things for her wasn't a dramatic overhaul. She started having a baked potato with dinner a few nights a week instead of rice. She picked up a habit of brewing hibiscus tea in the evenings instead of her second cup of regular tea. And she started roasting beets on Sundays to have on hand through the week. Nothing about her life got harder.
At her next 2 appointments, several months apart, her numbers had come down enough that her doctor, not me, was the one who first pointed it out. What she told me stuck with me, because I think it's the entire emotional core of why subtraction-only advice fails so many people. It felt like something she was adding to her life, not one more thing being taken away from it.
She still remembers, months later, that the first time her doctor mentioned the improvement, her own reaction was surprise. She hadn't been white-knuckling through a restriction the whole time, so she hadn't been bracing for the number to move. It had simply moved quietly in the background of an ordinary few months of dinners. Now, a few honest caveats, because I would rather you trust every word of this video than feel good for 20 minutes and mistrust me later. None of what I've described here is personalized medical advice, and none of it should replace a conversation with your own physician, especially if you have an existing heart or kidney condition, if you're on dialysis, or if you're taking blood thinners. If your kidneys are already struggling, and this matters enormously for anyone with advanced chronic kidney disease, potassium-rich foods like potatoes need to be handled carefully, sometimes restricted rather than added, because kidneys that can't clear potassium efficiently can let it build to dangerous levels in the bloodstream. That's a conversation for you and your nephrologist, not for a video. If you're taking a potassium-sparing medication, an ACE inhibitor, an AERB, or a drug like spironolactone, adding a lot of potassium-rich food without your doctor's knowledge is a real interaction worth flagging, not a hypothetical one. If you're on warfarin or another blood thinner, garlic's mild effect on platelets is worth mentioning at your next appointment before you start any concentrated garlic supplement. And if you're already on blood pressure medication, please don't let anything in this video tempt you to quietly stop taking it because you added a cup of hibiscus tea to your routine. These foods are a genuine complement to good medical care, not a replacement for it. And the research I've shown you was almost entirely conducted in people who were still receiving standard medical management. One more thing worth asking your doctor about at your next visit, whether or not you change a single thing about your diet. Request an actual potassium and kidney function panel if it's been a while since your last one, because that single lab result tells you far more about how these foods apply to your specific body than anything I can say in a video meant for a general audience.
Let me bring this all the way back down to the ground before we close, because 6 new facts in 20 minutes can blur together if I don't tie them off. Beetroot, through its nitrate content, feeds your blood vessels the raw material for nitric oxide and helped drop systolic pressure by 9 points in a controlled trial. A few servings a week or a small glass of beet juice is the action.
Aged garlic. Extract lowered systolic pressure by an average of 8 points across a pooled analysis of more than 500 people. Conversation with your doctor about a standardized extract is the action if you want to pursue it seriously. Kiwi fruit. 3 a day. Beat an apple a day by 3.6 points over 8 weeks in a randomized Norwegian trial. Add it to breakfast. The baked or boiled potato, skin on, delivered a 6-point drop in a controlled feeding study by supplying potassium your kidneys can use to flush sodium. Swap it in for a more processed starch a few nights a week, and go light on the salt. Dark chocolate, 70% cocoa or higher, produced a modest but real 2-point average drop. Larger in people with elevated pressure to start. 1 small square most days in place of dessert. Dear and hibiscus tea, 3 cups a day, produced the single largest and most talked about result on this list. A 7 to 13-point drop depending on your starting numbers in the defining clinical trial. With your doctor's input if you're on blood pressure medication. If you only start with 2 of these tonight, make it the potato and the hibiscus tea. They're the 2 easiest to fold into a normal evening. They require nothing special from a store, and between them they hit both doors we talked about at the start.
The sodium-potassium balance and the nitric oxide relaxation in 1 simple swap and 1 simple drink.
I'd genuinely like to know which of these 6 surprised you the most. Tell me in the comments, because I read every one of them, and it tells me what to dig into next. If this kind of straight, sourced explanation of what's actually happening inside your body is useful to you, consider subscribing. This channel exists to keep bringing you real, evidence-based information about eating well after 60. No supplements, no fear, just the research and what it actually means for your plate. And if you know someone who still salts their potatoes before they even taste them, or someone who's been avoiding an entire vegetable because of a rumor nobody ever fact-checked, send them this video. It takes them 20 minutes, and it might change what's sitting on their table tonight. Next week, I want to show you 5 everyday drinks that are quietly raising your blood pressure without you ever noticing, including one that most people assume is completely harmless. I'll see you then.